For more debates, updates, and bonus clips, sign up at thebigconversation.show.
In considering whether it's better on the whole that a being without good prospects of a happy or worthwhile life, whether that being should live or die, in considering that question, it's relevant to ask, if this child dies, will there be another child who is brought into existence and who would have a good and rich and fulfilling life, and who would not have existed if that other child had not died?
I think this is where often the disability advocates have a problem, though, isn't it, Peter? In as much as they say, well, who are you to judge the value of the life of the disabled child over against a able-bodied child, because it's not that's perhaps too simplistic a way of understanding the thing.
Well, of course, there are many factors, and it would depend. I mean, it's not simply that, of any disability that this is true, but there might be some of whom I think you clearly could say a child who has a condition, for example, called epidermolysis bullosa, which is one where the skin keeps breaking and it's impossible really to stop the skin breaking and wounds developing and infections developing. And if you try and bandage it and then you change the bandages, you just pull off more skin. And in very severe cases, that's a life of misery and suffering, and the child will die predictably within months or a couple of years. So I think it is possible to say objectively, really, that is not a good life, that it's better if that child were never born, or if they are born, that they die swiftly and humanely, rather than we try to prolong their life as long as we can.
I mean, where do you stand on this then? Because I take it that for you, the principle of human value is broader than simply whether that child will or won't experience a certain degree of pain in their life.
There's a whole number of things going on here. I mean, I think firstly, we need to be very careful. I mean, I don't like wielding slippery slope arguments, but there is a slight one here of going how far before we have an issue. And so to use an analogy, Justin, if you and I were tasked with demolishing a building near here in London, and you were my supervisor, and you said to me, like, before we press the button, Andy, your job is to go through this building, all sort of 14 stories of it, and just check there's no human beings in there. And I come back and I report to you, oh, well, I don't think there's any human beings, you can press the button. Would you press the button and demolish the building based on I think there might not be anybody in there? And I think I get a bit worried when we say, well, we think the quality of life is such that here's a clear-cut case. That's problem number one. Secondly, I think the other problem with utilitarianism, I mean, it's been subject, there's a reason it's not believed particularly widely, and I think it's subject to two pretty critical critiques. First is it does tend to absorb the individual into the whole, and you start trying to add up, or and do sort of add up the happiness and subtract the suffering. That becomes a huge problem. For example, we might enslave you and put you to work for Peter, and Peter's happiness goes up by a vast amount, and your happiness goes down by a little bit less. But I think most people would still say we'd wronged you by using you to benefit Peter, even if we could somehow zero sum it. And I think the other issue as well that often gets missed in utilitarian discussions is, of course, how we measure net happiness. Anyway, I mean, do we add it up? Do we average it? If we have 10 people with 10 units of happiness each, well, obviously the average amount of happiness per person is 10. Or if we have one person over here, perhaps a utility monster, as Robert Nozick, the great American philosopher, might put it, one person over here with 91 units and everyone else has one, well, the average is still the same. And I think all of those thought experiments show that I think once you start trying to weigh happiness or subtract suffering or all these other kind of things, you hit a problem. And so I think that's why I think the founders, those who formed the UDHR, did an absolutely brilliant job. It's not perfect. There are discussions to be had. But grounding it in nature, grounding it in dignity, grounding it in what as philosophers we'd call ontology, is a much more secure founding than subjective sort of statement.